descend with me beneath the roots of the Erd tree, past the crumbling stones of forgotten ages, deeper still, through caverns that echo with ancient whispers, until you reach a place where starlight has never touched stone. Here, in the eternal darkness beneath the lands between, sprawls a city that should not exist. Towers of pale stone rise from the shadows like the bones of dead gods, their surfaces carved with constellations that mirror no sky you've ever seen. Above this impossible metropolis stretches something even more impossible, a night sky complete with stars and nebulae, brilliant and cold, yet somehow wrong. The stars don't twinkle, they never move. And if you look closely enough, you can see where the illusion frays at the edges, where this false heaven meets the crushing reality of underground stone. Welcome, lore seekers, to another deep dive with Keen 7 Lore, where today we unravel one of Elden Ring's most haunting mysteries, the story of the Nox civilization and their catastrophic fall from grace. This is more than just the tale of a lost people. It's a tragedy written in silver tears and starlight, a cautionary epic about what happens when mortals dare to murder gods, and a mystery that touches nearly every corner of the lands between's fractured history. The Nox present us with a paradox wrapped in an enigma. Here is a civilization technologically advanced enough to create life itself, spiritually bold enough to forge weapons capable of slaying divine beings, yet now reduced to silent sentinels in buried cities, waiting eternally for a prophecy that may never come to pass. Their story isn't found in any single tome or inscription. Instead, it must be pieced together from scattered armor descriptions, weapon fragments, and the mute testimony of their underground ruins. Every silver tear that flows through their weapons, every star that glimmers in their false sky, every monk that stands eternal vigil in their empty halls. All of these speak to a glory that was, a sin that shattered it, and a hope that endures even in the deepest darkness. To understand the Nox, we must first understand what they lost. Picture, if you will, a time before the Erd tree's golden radiance dominated the horizon, when the lands between knew different powers and different gods. The Nox once walked beneath true stars, built their cities under open skies, and drew their power not from golden grace but from celestial bodies that wheeled overhead in cosmic patterns. They were astrologers, yes, but more than that. They were a people who believed that fate itself could be read in stellar configurations, that destiny was written in the void between stars. The remnants of their surface civilization still haunt the lands between, though few recognize them for what they are. In Limgrave, in Liurnia, in Caelid, everywhere you can find ruins of white stone marked with astronomical symbols, structures that predate the current age by untold centuries. These weren't primitive people scraping out existence in mud huts. The Nox built with permanence in mind, crafting their structures from stone that has outlasted empires. Their architecture speaks to both mathematical precision and artistic vision. Spiraling towers that mirror constellation patterns, bridges that arc like the path of shooting stars, observatories positioned to track celestial movements with stunning accuracy. But it was in their metallurgy that the Nox truly excelled beyond any civilization before or since. The flowing weapons wielded by their modern descendants aren't mere armaments. They're expressions of a technology so advanced it appears almost magical. These weapons are forged from silver tears, a liquid metal that responds to will itself, that can shift from solid to liquid and back again in response to its wielder's intent. Imagine the expertise required to work with such a material. Every Nox swordstress who whips her blade through the air in impossible arcs is carrying a piece of technology that the finest smiths of Leyndell couldn't replicate if they had 1,000 years to study it. The silver tears themselves hint at something even more remarkable about Nox civilization. These aren't just raw materials found in nature. They're artificial constructs, primitive forms of life created through methods that blur the line between smithing and sorcery. When you encounter a silver tear in the Eternal Cities, you're not just facing an enemy. You're witnessing the earliest attempts at creating artificial life, experiments that would eventually lead to something far more ambitious and terrible. The mimic tears. Consider what this means. The Nox didn't just work metal, they gave it consciousness. They didn't just craft weapons, they created partners that could adapt to any fighting style. This level of sophistication suggests a civilization that had mastered not just the physical sciences, but had begun to probe the very nature of consciousness itself. They were playing with forces that even the demigods would later struggle to comprehend. The black moon of Nokstella represented the apex of their astronomical achievements. Unlike the full moon of Ranni or the dark moon of Ranni, the black moon was something uniquely Nox, a celestial body, or perhaps a manifestation of celestial power that provided tangible magical benefits to those who could commune with it. The game tells us this moon was the source of numerous magical boons for the Nox of Nokstella specifically, suggesting that different eternal cities might have had different celestial patrons. This wasn't a one-size-fits-all religious system, but a complex astronomical theology where different stars and moons held different significance for different communities. The reverence the Nox held for the night sky went beyond simple worship. They understood something that the Golden Order would later try to suppress, that the stars weren't distant decorations, but active forces that influenced the world. Fate itself flowed from stellar movements. The future could be read in cosmic patterns. And perhaps most dangerously, the stars could be petitioned, bargained with, even commanded if one had the proper knowledge and tools. This brings us to the heart of our mystery. What exactly did the Nox do to earn such catastrophic punishment? The game provides us with a smoking gun in the form of the Fingerslayer blade, described as proof of the high treason committed by the Eternal City. But like everything in Elden Ring's mythology, the full story requires careful excavation. If you're finding this exploration of the Nox's lost glory fascinating, consider subscribing to support the channel and join our growing community of lore enthusiasts who delve deep into gaming's greatest mysteries. Your support truly makes these comprehensive investigations possible, allowing us to uncover stories that might otherwise remain buried in the depths. The Fingerslayer blade itself is a horrific artifact. The item description tells us it was born of a corpse, a blood-drenched fetish that symbolizes the Eternal City's downfall. But whose corpse? The name provides a clue. This is a blade designed to slay fingers, those disturbing emissaries of the greater will that would later serve as interpreters of divine mandate. But the Nox didn't just create a weapon theoretically capable of killing a divine servant. The emphasis on it being born from a corpse suggests they actually succeeded in killing something divine, then used its remains to forge a weapon capable of killing more divine beings. This act of deicide would have been unthinkable to most civilizations, but the Nox had both the technological capability and the philosophical framework to attempt it. Their stellar worship put them at odds with the Greater Will's vision of order. While the Greater Will sought to impose a singular divine mandate through the Elden Ring and its Erdtree, the Nox believed in a cosmos full of different powers, different fates, different possibilities. They weren't content to be subjects under divine rule. They wanted to forge their own destiny, even if it meant challenging the gods themselves. The creation of the Fingerslayer blade might have been just the beginning of their rebellion. The Nox were attempting to forge a lord, though what exactly this means remains tantalizingly unclear. Some scholars interpret this as an attempt to create an artificial being powerful enough to challenge the Greater Will's authority. The mimic tears, those perfect shapeshifters capable of copying any form, any fighting style, any power, might have been prototypes for this ultimate creation. Imagine the audacity. Not content with killing servants of the divine, the Nox were trying to create their own divine being, a Lord of Night who would rule under stars rather than golden light. The community has developed numerous theories about what specific act triggered the Greater Will's retaliation. Some believe the Nox allied themselves with Baal the Dread during his rebellion against Dragon Lord Placidusax, the Elden Lord who served before the age of the Erdtree. This would place their rebellion in the earliest ages of the world, when the Greater Will's authority was still being established. Others point to similarities between Nox practices and the later Night of Black Knives, suggesting their treason might be connected to that assassination of Godwyn the Golden. What seems most likely, based on careful analysis of item descriptions and environmental storytelling, is that the Nox committed not one act of treason, but a series of escalating defiances. They rejected the Greater Will's authority, developed weapons capable of harming divine servants, attempted to create their own lord, and possibly even tried to summon or control entities from the void beyond the stars. Each act would have been seen as greater blasphemy than the last, until finally, the Greater Will's patience was exhausted. The punishment, when it came, was absolute and terrible. This is where Astel enters our story. Astel, Naturalborn of the Void, a creature of such alien horror that its very presence warps our understanding of what's possible in the lands between. Astel isn't like other bosses you encounter in Elden Ring. Dragons, however mighty, are still recognizably biological entities. Demigods, however corrupted, still follow comprehensible forms. But Astel is something else entirely, a malformed star given life, a creature of pure cosmic malevolence with a skull that seems almost human until you realize those aren't eyes but voids that drink in light. The game tells us directly that Astel stole the sky from the Eternal City. Not destroyed, not darkened, stole. This specific wording suggests something far more cruel than simple devastation. Astel didn't just kill the Nox or destroy their buildings. It took away the very thing they valued most, their connection to the true stars. The false night sky that now hangs above Nokron and Nokstella isn't just a pale imitation of what was lost, it's a mockery, a constant reminder of what the Nox once had and can never regain. But Astel's involvement raises as many questions as it answers. Was this creature summoned by the Greater Will as an instrument of divine punishment? Or, and this possibility is even more chilling, did the Nox summon Astel themselves, perhaps as a weapon against the Greater Will, only to lose control of it? The game provides evidence for both interpretations. Astel's title, Naturalborn of the Void, suggests it comes from the empty spaces between stars, exactly the sort of entity the star-worshipping Nox might have tried to contact. But its role as punisher of their civilization implies divine mandate. The destruction wasn't limited to just Nokron and Nokstella. The game hints at a third eternal city, one so thoroughly destroyed that even its name has been lost to history. This nameless city might have been where Astel first manifested, where the Nox's experiments went catastrophically wrong, or where the Greater Will's wrath burned hottest. All we have are scattered references, architectural fragments that don't quite match either surviving city, and the haunting possibility that there were once more Nox than we know, more cities than we can explore, more stories than we'll ever uncover. The physical catastrophe was accompanied by a spiritual one. The black moon of Nokstella was destroyed, shattering into the memory stones that sorcerers now use to expand their capacity for magic. Think about the symbolism here. The Nox's source of power wasn't just destroyed but commodified, turned into trinkets that any hedge wizard can use to memorize an extra spell. It's the ultimate indignity, the reduction of a civilization's spiritual center to a gameplay mechanic. Whether the Eternal Cities were literally pushed underground or were already subterranean when disaster struck remains a point of scholarly debate. The Japanese text of the game preserves this ambiguity, stating that the Greater Will's ire touched the Nox deep underground and destroyed them, which could mean they were already living beneath the surface when punishment came. Perhaps they had already begun their descent, seeking to hide their blasphemous experiments from divine oversight. Or perhaps the physical relocation underground was part of the punishment itself, a burial of the living that would serve as an eternal reminder of what happens to those who defy the gods. Life in the eternal twilight of the underground cities took on a character of patient desperation. The Nox didn't die out or abandon their ruins. Instead, they adapted to their new reality with the same ingenuity they had once applied to metallurgy and astronomy. The Nox monks and Swordstresses you encounter aren't mindless hollows, but sentient beings maintaining eternal vigil. They patrol routes that have been worn smooth by countless centuries of repetition. They maintain weapons that will never rust, tend to flames that will never die, and wait for a prophecy that may never come true. The hierarchy of modern Nox society reflects both continuity with their past and adaptation to their circumstances. The Nox monks, draped in flowing robes that mirror their flowing weapons, serve as both warriors and keepers of knowledge. Their crowns, topped with silver spheres, might represent the celestial bodies they can no longer see. The Swordstresses, exclusively female warriors who have mastered the art of flowing blade combat, suggest a society where gender roles evolved along specific lines. Perhaps because certain astronomical observations or stellar communions could only be performed by women. Then there are the Night Maidens, giant priestesses who tower over normal Nox, their bodies possibly enlarged through the same techniques used to create the mimic tears. These beings serve as living monuments to Nox ambition, their very existence. A reminder that the Nox never stopped experimenting, never stopped pushing boundaries, even after their catastrophic punishment. The Night Maiden's size might be practical. In the vast underground spaces, larger beings can patrol more effectively. But it might also be symbolic, an attempt to create beings grand enough to touch the false stars of their artificial sky. The Nox's experiments continued even in exile. The Dragonkin soldiers represent one of their most ambitious post-fall projects, artificial beings that combine draconic power with humanoid form. These creatures, found throughout the Eternal Cities and in Siofra River, weren't just weapons, but attempts to recreate or perhaps surpass the dragons that once ruled the lands between. The fact that they're called soldiers implies the Nox were preparing for something, perhaps a war they hoped to fight when their Lord of Night finally arrived. The puppetry techniques later perfected by Saluvis might have originated with the Nox. The ability to turn a living being into a controllable puppet while preserving their combat abilities would have obvious applications for a civilization trying to build an army in secret. Every puppet string might be made from silver tears, every control mechanism an evolution of the techniques used to give consciousness to liquid metal. It's a dark perversion of their life creation abilities, turning from making new life to enslaving existing life. The Nox also seem to have formed or influenced a broader underground alliance. The ancestral followers who inhabit Siofra River and Ainsel River share the underground realm with the Nox, and while their cultures are clearly different, there are suggestions of interaction and possibly even cooperation. The ancestral followers worship a more primal form of spirituality centered on the massive ancestor spirits, but they too exist in spaces lit by false stars, suggesting either a shared punishment or a shared response to underground exile. The claimant found throughout the Eternal Cities present another mystery. These beings, formed from the primordial clay that existed before life properly began, might be Nox attempts to start over, to create servants or citizens from the most basic building blocks of existence. Or they might be older than the Nox themselves, original inhabitants of these underground spaces that the Nox displaced or incorporated into their civilization. Their presence adds another layer to the question of whether the Eternal Cities were always underground or were moved there as punishment. The connection between the Nox and Celia, town of sorcery, provides one of our few glimpses into how Nox culture influenced the surface world even after their fall. Celia's sorcerers practice night sorcery, a school of magic that explicitly draws on the same stellar principles the Nox once revered. The town's architecture mirrors that of the Eternal Cities, and its position in Caelid, near where stars are said to have once fallen, is no coincidence. Celia might represent a Nox colony that escaped the worst of the punishment, or perhaps a group of surface dwellers who learn Nox techniques and preserve them. Through all their adaptations and continued experiments, the Nox maintain their central hope, the coming of the Lord of Night. This prophesied figure would usher in a new age of stars, overthrowing the Golden Order and returning the Nox to their former glory. The specific wording of the prophecy is crucial. They don't await a savior who will lead them back to the surface or restore their destroyed moon. They await someone who will fundamentally restructure the cosmic order, replacing the Greater Will's dominion with something else. This brings us to one of Elden Ring's most fascinating connections, the relationship between the Nox prophecy and Ranni the Witch's questline. Ranni, who orchestrated the Night of Black Knives, who stole the Rune of Death, who killed her own Empyrean body to escape the Greater Will's influence, seems positioned to fulfill exactly what the Nox have been waiting for. Her Age of Stars ending doesn't just represent a change in leadership, but a fundamental reordering of the world's relationship with divinity and fate. The Fingerslayer blade, that ancient proof of Nox's treason, becomes crucial to Ranni's plan. She needs it to kill her own. 2 fingers, severing her last connection to the Greater Will. The weapon the Nox forged from divine corpse flesh thousands of years ago finally fulfills its purpose in the hands of a witch who embodies everything they hoped their Lord of Night would be. There's a poetic justice to it. The Greater Will's punishment of the Nox created the very conditions that would eventually enable its own overthrow. But we should question whether Ranni truly represents what the Nox envisioned. Her Age of Stars promises a 1,000-year journey into fear, doubt, and loneliness. Hardly the glorious restoration the Nox might have hoped for. Perhaps this is the ultimate irony of their story. They waited countless centuries for a prophecy that, when fulfilled, looks nothing like what they expected. The Lord of Night came, but she's not their savior. She's simply another power using their tools for her own ends. The player's role in this cosmic drama is particularly interesting. To complete Ranni's questline and usher in the Age of Stars, you must first defeat Star-Scourge Radahn, whose strength holds back the very stars the Nox once worshipped. Radahn learned gravity magic specifically to hold the stars in stasis, preventing fate itself from progressing. His defeat literally returns motion to the cosmos, causing stars to fall and opening the path to Nokron. In a sense, every player who defeats Radahn partially undoes the Greater Will's punishment of the Nox, returning at least some stellar influence to the world. Yet the Nox themselves seem largely unaware of these momentous events occurring around them. The monks continue their patrols. The Swordstresses practice their forms. The Night Maidens stand in silent judgment. They've been waiting so long that waiting itself has become their purpose, their identity. Even if you bring them the Age of Stars they've prophesied, would they recognize it? Would they know what to do with it? Or have they become so adapted to their underground existence that the surface world, the true stars, and the freedom they represent would be as alien to them as Astel itself? The tragedy of the Nox extends beyond their own civilization to influence the broader themes of Elden Ring. They represent the danger of defying divine authority, yes, but also the necessity of it. Without rebels like the Nox, without those willing to forge god-killing blades and dream of different cosmic orders, the world would stagnate under singular divine rule. Their failure was catastrophic, but their attempt was necessary. They proved that the Greater Will could be challenged, that divine servants could be killed, that fate itself wasn't immutable. The illusory sky that hang above their cities serve as a perfect metaphor for their condition. These stars provide light but no warmth, beauty but no meaning, a simulation of the cosmic connection they once had, but none of its power. The Nox live in a kind of purgatory, surrounded by reminders of what they've lost, but unable to die or forget. Their persistence in the face of such complete defeat is either admirable or pathetic, depending on your perspective. They're either noble keepers of ancient wisdom waiting for their moment of vindication, or deluded relics clinging to false hope while the world moves on without them. The environmental storytelling in the Eternal Cities reinforces these themes brilliantly. The architecture is pristine but empty, suggesting a civilization that stopped growing centuries ago. The silver tears still flow, but they seem to move without purpose, creating forms that dissolve back into liquid without achieving anything. The entire space feels frozen in time, as if the moment of catastrophe never quite ended, as if the Nox are caught in an eternal instant of downfall. This preservation extends to their enemies and obstacles. The massive steel balls that roll through Nokron's streets might have once been training devices for warriors, or perhaps construction equipment for their great works. Now they're simply hazards, endlessly repeating paths that no longer serve any purpose. The lesser beings that populate the cities, the Claymen, the Silver Tears, the various constructs, all seem to be running on automatic, following programs or instincts from an age when these actions had meaning. Even the treasures found in the eternal cities tell stories of lost purpose. The ghost glovewort that grows here allows spirit ashes to reach their full potential, suggesting the Nox pioneered techniques for binding and empowering spirits that would later become standard practice. The celestial dew that can absolve sins at the Church of Vows might be crystallized starlight from when the Nox had access to true celestial power. Every item is a fragment of former glory, useful to the player, but representing catastrophic loss to the civilization that created it. The Nox's influence on the game's magic system is particularly noteworthy. Night sorceries, which deal with invisibility, misdirection, and stellar power, all originate from Nox traditions. These spells don't just deal damage, they manipulate perception itself, hiding the caster from sight or creating phantom projectiles that home in on targets. This suggests the Nox understanding of reality was fundamentally different from the Golden Order's rigid categorizations. They understood that observation changes reality, that what is hidden can be as powerful as what is revealed, that the darkness between stars is as important as the light they emit. The connection between the Nox and the various underground rivers, Siofra, Ainsel, and the network of waterways that connect them raises questions about whether water itself was part of their stellar worship. These rivers flow in impossible directions, their waters carrying properties that shouldn't exist in normal hydrology. The Nox might have used these rivers as a kind of circulatory system for their underground realm, moving materials, messages, and maybe even stellar influences to aquatic networks that mirror the celestial patterns they once observed in the sky. As we near the end of our exploration, it's worth considering what the Nox mean for Elden Ring's larger narrative about cycles, rebellion, and the price of defiance. Every age in the lands between seems to begin with someone overthrowing the previous order. The Greater Will overthrew the primordial forces, the Golden Order overthrew the ancient dragons, and if Ranni has her way, a new age of stars will overthrow the Golden Order itself. The Nox were simply one iteration in this endless cycle, their tragedy not unique but archetypal. Yet there's something especially poignant about the Nox's fate because they survived it. Other civilizations that defied the gods were wiped out entirely. The giants were nearly exterminated in their war against the Golden Order, while in a separate conflict, the gloam-eyed Queen's black flame was sealed away. But the Nox were condemned to something worse than death, an existence drained of meaning, a life sentence served in cities that are simultaneously prisons and monuments to what they once were. They're forced to remember their glory every time they look up at their artificial heavens, to recall their power every time they wield their flowing weapons, to maintain hope for a prophecy that might never come true. The question of whether the Nox deserve their fate is one the game deliberately leaves unanswered. Were they hubristic mortals who needed to be taught humility? Or were they brave rebels who dared to challenge unjust divine authority? The game provides evidence for both interpretations, leaving players to decide for themselves. This moral ambiguity is central to Elden Ring's storytelling. There are no purely good or evil factions, only different groups pursuing different visions of what the world should be, each willing to commit terrible acts in service of their ideals. In the end, the Nox civilization stands as one of Elden Ring's most complete and tragic narratives. From their origins as star-worshipping surface dwellers through their technological and spiritual achievements, their act of divine rebellion, their catastrophic punishment, and their eternal wait for redemption, every aspect of their story resonates with the game's central themes. They remind us that in the lands between, defying the gods is possible, but never without cost, that hope can persist even in the darkest places, and that sometimes the greatest tragedy isn't death, but being forced to live with the consequences of your choices. The false stars still shine above Nokron and Nokstella. The Nox still stand their eternal watch. The Fingerslayer blade waits to taste divine blood again. And somewhere in the space between what was and what might be, between the false stars and the true ones, between punishment and redemption, the Nox continue their vigil. They are proof that some dreams are too powerful to die, even when the dreamers themselves have been buried beneath the weight of the world. Thank you, lore seekers, for joining me on this journey into the buried heart of Elden Ring's mythology. The story of the Nox reminds us that even in a world dominated by golden light and divine trees, there are always those who look to the stars and dream of different possibilities. If you found value in this deep exploration of their civilization, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue uncovering these hidden narratives, bringing to light stories that might otherwise remain buried in the eternal darkness. Until next time, keep questioning the histories you're told, keep searching for the truth beneath the surface, and remember, sometimes the most profound stories are found not in the light of grace, but in the spaces between the stars. This has been Keen 7 Lore, and I'll see you in the next deep dive into gaming's greatest mysteries.